various entities. This morning with us we have the Honorable Dr. Orlando Brewster, the Minister, who has asked for this press conference to be held so that he can inform the nation of what his ministry has been doing and continues to do. We have at present the Permanent Secretary, Ms. Catherine De Freitas. She would also be making a presentation to us this morning. My name is Philcol Jeffers, Administrative Officer within the Ministry of National Mobilization with responsibilities for communications and marketing. Today's press conference is being called to bring to the fore all of the information that has been presented in lieu of the explosive eruption of the La Soufrière volcano on April 9, 2021. The Ministry of National Mobilization has been very active in its programming and has been providing periodic updates to the Vincentian public and those in the diaspora via our social media platforms and also by being guests on various radio and television programs both locally, regionally, and internationally. Today, therefore, presents the Ministry's comprehensive program through the eyes of the Ministry to the general public, thus allowing you, the general public, to understand the work that is being done, the work that has completed, the processes that are available, and how one can access these services, and also the role of the Ministry in the recovery process. We also want to welcome the Director of the Social Development, Ms. Marissa Finchburg, with us this morning, who would also provide a pragmatic approach to what has been happening. Just for those of you who are listening, we are live on Bay Hill Radio, both on Facebook and on their local radio program, I-95 Radio in Trinidad and Tobago, Kankadi Radio in Canada, and Fun City Radio in New York City. Thank you and welcome this morning. At this point in time, I would ask the Permanent Secretary to bring an overview of what is happening within the ministry to us at this point.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, and welcome again. I would like to take this opportunity to thank especially the staff of the Ministry of National Mobilization, who have worked tirelessly and is still working since the volcanic eruption of April 9, 2021. Also, I'd like to thank especially our donors and those in the diaspora who has been contributing effortlessly to this relief effort. This eruption has significantly increased the social vulnerability in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, especially among the displaced population. The Ministry of National Mobilization has also not only involved in the relief effort of distribution food and supplies to the displaced persons, especially those in the private homes, but has also invested heavily in providing psychosocial support interventions to the displaced persons and communities that were impacted by the volcanic eruption, with direct support from UNICEF, UN Women, UNFPA, and the SVG Red Cross Association. The Child Development Division, in collaboration with the Ministries of Education and Health, SVG Red Cross Association, and IsraAid, implemented the Return to Happiness program and child-friendly spaces within shelters and communities. These initiatives were undertaken to provide safe spaces in emergency settings and to help support and protect children in the restoration of normalcy to those whose lives were disrupted. Evacuees were provided with hygiene and protection kits, food hampers, and personal protection equipment. The Gender Affairs Division is currently conducting gender-based violence awareness within the emergency shelters to sensitize evacuees and shelter managers on the issues of the men's and the support services available. This is complemented by community sensitization sessions in collaboration with the SVG Red Cross Association that targets those evacuees in private shelters. Thus far, the communities of Beckway, Kingstown, and Layo have been engaged, and other communities would be targeted in the upcoming months. The Ministry of National Mobilization, with direct support from UNICEF and other ministries, brought the goodness tour to our shores between May and July, whereby therapeutic art sessions were undertaken with over 110 children in public shelters and in communities. In addition, the tour painted 6 large-scale murals at Georgetown Community Center, North Union Secondary School, Tramuka Government School, Peter Bodell, Layo Waterfront, and Nemo Headquarters. These murals are receiving much attention as an extra effort was made to ensure that they captured and reflected the culture and essence of the communities. At this point, with that broad overview, I would like to hand back over to the chairperson for this conference brief session, and he will direct who the next speaker should be.
All right, thank you very much, Permanent Secretary De Freitas. At this point, we would invite the Minister to make his presentation and give the perspectives that has happened, followed by Mrs. Finchburg, who will look at the pragmatic areas in a bit more detailed fashion so that you can have a greater understanding.
Well, let me say good morning to everyone. I want to thank the media for being here this morning to broadcast this event. Allow me to acknowledge my Permanent Secretary within the Ministry of National Mobilization, P.S. Catherine De Freitas. Also the Director of Social Development, Marissa Finchburg, who is also with us today on the panel. Today I would have a brief rapport with the folks who are viewing across the nation, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and those in the diaspora as well who's tuned in. And it is long overdue that the Ministry of National Mobilization should present to the people what is happening within the ministry, and we are here this morning to do such. And if you would allow me a little time, I would be as concise and precise as possible. And we would deal today with matters pertaining to the ministry and its approach to the relief and recovery efforts post-volcanic eruption, April 9th, 2021. Now, the Ministry of National Mobilization, Social Development, the Family, Gender, Youth Affairs, Persons with Disability, Cooperatives, Community Development, Housing, and Informal Human Settlement is quite an extensive ministry and is far-reaching. And in the relief and recovery efforts, pre and post the explosive eruption of La Soufrière, every division within the ministry has been continuously playing a pivotal role as we rise from the ashes. Firstly, I want to thank the Almighty God for His never-ending grace and mercies that kept us throughout this difficult period. And although we have experienced one of our worst volcanic eruptions this country has ever seen, we still have much to be thankful and grateful for. Because throughout this whole ordeal, we didn't have any severe injury or loss of life to any individual as a result. It is no secret that the explosive eruption of La Soufrière on April 9, 2021 significantly increased our social vulnerability within this nation, as mentioned by the peers. And due to this increase, the ministry had to introduce some very important 30 days of the eruption. Some of these measures that were implemented were the establishment of a national data and call center to collect information on displaced and affected households. We also, through the ministry, developed a national evacuation placement registry to identify displaced families, temporary placement location, where they came from, their migration patterns, as well as their needs. The ministry also established a distribution and repackaging center to provide food packages for displaced families in private homes and some in hotel and apartments that were not provided with cooked meals by that accommodation. Other basic amenities were also provided to displaced families in shelters. The ministry also developed and implemented a need assessment tool to map the needs and services required for the folks who are displaced, some who are still in private homes as well. We are still working with them. And finally, we established a national psychosocial framework with state and non-state agencies, focusing mainly on a coordinated approach to address the trauma and psychosocial needs of displaced families. Through the mechanisms that I mentioned, we were able to provide the necessary aids and support to the displaced families from the red and orange zones. From the data captured through analysis of the National Evacuation Placement Registry, we were able to identify that approximately 5,083 families, or approximately 19,319 persons, evacuated their homes due to the eruption, whether from the directly impacted zone or some of the zones outside, which are the green and yellow. The captured data was also able to provide us with critical information with regards to the number of displaced families in private homes, and also families from the evacuated zones who did not evacuate, because throughout the evacuation, what happened is that some folks decided to remain in the red and orange zones. So we had to capture this data through our national data registry, and this was done in collaboration with NEMO and the Ministry of National Mobilization. The database, when we established it had some shortcomings, and it was in no way perfect. We realized that there were errors, some incomplete and sometimes inaccurate information, and also some duplications. However, with the continuous updating and cleaning of the database, we were able to reduce significantly many of these issues, as well as capture some of the people who may have fallen through the cracks in the registration process. So the database, essentially, it captured a lot of the information, but it had to be a rolling database in order for us to capture those persons who had information that was incomplete. You know, some of them were inaccurate as well. Although a deadline was given to be registered with the National Registry at the Data Center at NEMO, which was supposed to be done on May 31st, so there was a deadline given on May 31st, we still continued through the ministry headquarters to provide assistance for displaced persons who didn't register by the stipulated time. With the information provided through the registration process, the database established by the Ministry of National Mobilization was immediately ready to assist in the emergency response by providing food packages to displaced families on a bi-weekly basis. And I want to touch a bit on the food packages that was distributed through the ministry for a short time. To date, the government through this ministry has distributed over 25,000 food packages, or what we call the mobilization box. And this was primarily concentrated to folks displaced in private homes. And we also added to to the private homes folks who are returning, because as we are aware, there are some folks who have moved back into the zones, and we had to provide food packages for them when they were returning home. Now, what is the cost of all this in terms of the money? And it is important for us to highlight this. For the approximately 25,000 packages that we distributed, there's a cost attached to it of $6.6 million. And in addition to these food packages, or what we call the mobilization box, the government purchased over about 15,000 what we call the RRT boxes. And this was at a cost of $2.2 million. So far, just between these two food packages, we are at approximately $8 to $9 million between all these packages, totaling approximately about 40,000 food packages. It must be noted that these food packages were not only given to displaced persons from the red and orange zones, but a special effort was made in helping our vulnerable population throughout St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as they too were experiencing a difficult time. So we had to make sure that we cushion our vulnerable population as well. So the government partnered with various NGOs within the country to help with the distribution process. And some of the beneficiaries included persons with disabilities, various boys and girls homes across the island, the National AIDS Secretariat, our elderly population, and also our marginalized folks. So we made a special effort to make sure that we also provide the necessary support and food packages to this aspect of our population. The Ministry of National Mobilization, with the responsibility for social protection of our vulnerable, has taken on the mammoth task to support displaced families affected by the volcanic eruption. And we did this while we simultaneously addressed the needs of the poor and the indigent in our existing with our existing clients. So while our community development officers were out delivering food packages to the various communities, all the other divisions within the ministry were still functioning in order to meet the needs of our existing clientele, the folks that comes to the ministry to get help. Another important undertaking of the ministry was the establishment of the Suffering Relief Grant Program. And this was established to be run during the period of May to December 2021. And this was to provide cash transfer to support the displaced families. Using a need assessment survey tool, the ministry was able to establish and provide financial support monthly to affected families from the evacuated zones, where their average household income is below $1,000 per month. The Suffering Relief Grant, it targeted 80% of the displaced households, whether they were in shelters, private homes, in hotel accommodation, during the period of June to September. And this was done in collaboration with World Food Program through a Western Union money transfer. And for the remaining 20% who didn't fit in this threshold, we provided food packages or vouchers for that remaining 20% who had an average higher income in their household. Presently, the ministry is in the process of introducing the Suffering Relief Grant Phase 2. And this will be focusing on family life education and client empowerment support for 500 households from the red zone. And this will be done in this month, and this will also be done in collaboration with UNICEF. So we have to provide some family life education and some client empowerment support for some folks also in the red zone, and this is part of the Suffrage Grant Relief Phase 2. The supplementary budget of 2020-2021 with the approval and allocation of $2 million. This was given to the ministry to help to continue the Suffrage Relief Grant Phase 2 to displaced families in the red and orange zone. And this would be done through further income support and or food packages or vouchers to displaced families for the period August to December 2021. Now, the further income support, because we have mentioned, and you may have heard the Prime Minister mention from time to time, that there would be income support for non-farmers, but there's a certain criteria that gives you access to this form of income support, and I think Mirza could elaborate on that a little more as to, but presently we have already given out the forms, so persons can register for this income support, the non-farmers income support, and there is a requirement for it, where you have to be from the red or orange zone. You had like a little small business, whether it's a block making business, a little hair salon, and you were affected because of the eruption. But the process must be verified. So there is a verification process by your employer. So if you were working in with a block maker, for example, and you receive one of those non-farmers income support form, it first must be verified by your employer that yes, John Jones was working with me up until the eruption of La Soufrière, and there must be a second piece of verification by a justice of peace within the area to say, well, yes, I certify that he was indeed working with the block maker up until the point of the eruption. So there's some further income support that would be coming to folks in the red and orange zone. The ministry took some time to strengthen its family support grant component of the public assistance program. And this was done by providing cash transfer and client empowerment through the family life education, as I mentioned before. And UNICEF is playing a big part in this whole initiative to strengthen our family support grant component within the ministry as it relates to our public assistance program. We also will strengthen our existing public assistance program within the ministry by reviewing the outcomes of the support system that we are running so far. And once we review these, we would see the areas where we can improve on, or what we can do to make sure that we support certain persons who missed some form of support through our public assistance program. So we have to do a review, which is part of strengthening our family support grant after the initial period ends in October. So for September to December, we would put forward a new proposal as to the outcomes of that review. Now, the ministry has done and will continue to do tremendous work through various psychosocial support measures, and some of the works carried out includes the ministry through the Social Protection, Child Development and Gender Development Division responded to and continue to respond as crisis intervention measures to social issues that has present themselves within families who are in the shelters. We have to make a tremendous effort to help those folks through social protection, child development, and gender development division. You heard the permanent secretary mention the return to happiness, which was done by the Child Development Division, and this targeted, this had an outreach of about 71 shelters between the period of April to May 2021. And initial assessment and crisis intervention were conducted for families, and this was done both in private homes and also in shelters. Also, the Child Development Division has partnered with several key actors, as mentioned before by PS De Freitas. We work with the Ministry of Education, we've worked with the Ministry of Health, we're still working with them, and UNICEF, Red Cross, Israel Aid, all these are organizations that we've worked with and continue to work with within this period, and they were instrumental in implementing the child-friendly spaces, or what we call the safe spaces. And they went around and set up all these child-friendly spaces in the various shelters. And the objective of the CSF, the child-friendly spaces, is to restore a sense of normality and continuity to children whose lives have been disrupted following the displacement caused by the eruption of La Soufrière. Also, on psychosocial support, we conducted parenting workshops and child abuse awareness campaigns in shelters, and this was done again by Child Development between the period of June to July. And this aspect of the parenting workshop and child abuse awareness will be completed at the end of this month in August. And also within the ministry, the Gender Development did their part as to the psychosocial support, where they conducted domestic violence awareness sessions in shelters, and in partnership with UN agencies, and they went from shelters providing dignity kits, as well as conducting a gender-based assessment. And we have to thank all of the divisions within the ministry for the tremendous work that they have done thus far, and I know that they will continue to do this work, because I would say at this point it was not an easy task, with all the various ministries within the various divisions within the ministry, for all of them to come together to make sure that we accomplish the task that we set out to accomplish, which was to provide the necessary support to the folks who are displaced, or elderly, or vulnerable, or poor, or marginalized during this difficult period. We also, through the Ministry of National Mobilization, provide financial assistance for displaced families. Prior to the eruption, the ministry provided families within the red zone, from a minimum of a total population of 4,342 persons, or an equivalent of 1,110 households. We provide, through our public assistance program, financial assistance in the tune of $1.8 million. And this was done before the evacuation through our regular programs within the ministry. However, after the eruption, the World Food Program, which is a UN agency, focuses on providing emergency response to increase food access and quality of life due to internal or external shocks. They came to our assistance, and we were pleased to have partnered with them in an effort to prioritize for displaced families through the establishment of the National La Soufrière Grant Program. We also worked and received financial assistance from ADRA, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency. They came to our assistance and provided cash for folks who were displaced who didn't meet the threshold for the WFP program, and also Caritas. Caritas did some tremendous work here as well in assisting with cash and financial support. And also the Red Cross must be mentioned, because they also came in to assist the ministry, because at one point we had about 64 or so families who were missing from the various form of cash assistance, and Red Cross came and helped out and was able to support the 64 families who didn't receive any support from whether WFP, ADRA, or Caritas. To date, a commitment of over 8.4 million in cash has been allotted, and a total of 2.6 million has been expended thus far. And this is to aid in the relief effort. And I'm talking here about cash. The Lassafre Relief Grant Program, to qualify for this program, there was a minimum cash transfer of 300, and that went up to as much as 800 on a monthly basis. And where displaced families were not eligible for the cash transfer support, we were able to provide them with food packages and food vouchers, and that helped in assisting those families. Now, the journey has just begun. We have successfully provided payments for approximately 3,538 displaced households, and we will continue our support and relief effort. And not only did we concentrate on private homes, but there were also 589 families staying in public shelters who receive cash transfers as well. And to date, the government, in collaboration with donor agencies through this ministry, has committed $15,081,900 to socially protecting displaced families affected by the eruption, and thus far we have expended a total of approximately $10 million, as detailed earlier with the calculation of the various supports. I also finally want to touch on housing, the relief and recovery effort in housing, because this is what a lot of folks are waiting to hear, what is happening with the housing relief and recovery effort. Now, in the supplementary estimate of 2021, the Parliament approved $11.5 million to help with the housing reconstruction and rehabilitation. To break this down, $5 million was allocated to actual reconstruction, and another $6.5 to the purchasing of building materials for repairs to homes affected by the volcanic eruptions and floods. Thus far, the government has ordered $6.5 million worth of building materials, $3.9 million locally, and $2.6 million from a regional supplier. And as we speak right now, the local suppliers are currently supplying our Annisvale storeroom, and the regional order is expected to arrive in Port Kingston on August 8th. So we are in the process of getting the building materials for us to start with our repair and reconstruction phase of the relief effort as it relates to housing. Now, I must emphasize that the material will primarily serve for those in the northeastern and northwestern areas that were affected by the eruption of the La Soufrière volcano. And this would aid them in returning home. As you are aware, there are still a number of folks in public shelters who have not yet been given the all clear to return to their homes. Now, through the Ministry of Housing, we will have to utilize these building materials and go about a rapid repair and reconstruction process. Now, I could say some of the folks who are still in the shelters, some may have not returned back to their homes, so they do not know exactly what level of damage that they are facing in regards to the home they evacuated from. However, through NEMO and the Ministry of Transport and Works, we have an update on the preliminary assessment, and thus far we have a total of 553 homes identified with some level of damage sustained. Now, they were graded on different levels, from level 0 right up to level 4. Now, through the Ministry of Housing, we were in discussion, and we would primarily concentrate on levels 0 to 2, which are more of the smaller repairs and so on, and these would be done in a rapid manner in order for us to help with the reopening of schools. So those who sustain these small level of damage to their homes, through the Ministry of Housing, through our project, we will put together a team that could go out into the various zones and get contractors, and we would do these small repairs so that we can have some of the folks who are still in the public shelters to return back to their home once the all clear is given. Now, I must say that even with the 11.5 million from the preliminary assessment through NEMO submitted to the Ministry of Transport and Works, we are looking, and this figure I'm giving you, it is excluding those who have not even returned back to their homes yet to see what is happening. So there is an ongoing assessment. So far the preliminary assessment has stated that over $20 million worth of damage was sustained to homes within the red and orange zones. So the supplementary budget was just a start to the recovery and relief effort, and we would have to make a determination at cabinet as to how we are going to proceed with all the other arrangement with regards to the rebuilding process. And we are in it for the long haul. It is some daunting figures as it relates to the number of homes affected, and the number continues to increase daily. And you know, we have had some great input from folks in the diaspora who has reached out to us to help with the relief and recovery effort. not only as it relates to food, but also to the rebuilding process. And through the Ministry of Housing, we would work with those folks in the diaspora as they come to our aid and our assistance. And we have already earmarked some lands to start the process in terms of housing and the rebuilding. And I am sure pretty soon you would hear more on the amount of homes that we're going to start the process with. And I can assure you that within the next 2 to 3 weeks, there would be a massive repair program happening in the northern areas of the country, the northwestern areas and the northeastern areas, as it relates to the housing and recovery effort. So this is where I would close my presentation for today. I've touched on the various aspects of the ministry, our support, the support offered, whether it is through our distribution process of food to the private homes, our psychosocial support that we have provided to the displaced families, and also on the issue of housing, where we are thus far. And at this time, I would like to thank all those public servants, those volunteers who came out and who assisted us in the relief and recovery effort. It is not, the task of rebuilding is not only up to the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but we are all equally responsible to rebuild, and not only rebuild, but to rebuild much better and stronger as we rise from the ashes of La Soufrière. So, again, thanks to those in the diaspora for viewing, and thanks to the various media houses for carrying this press briefing. So at this time, I would hand over back to our chairperson, Mr. Jeffers.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. At this point, we'll have Ms. Marissa Finchburg, the Director of Social Development, to take us through the final bits in the presentation that the Minister would have mentioned, so that you have a clearer understanding of some of the processes that are affiliated with the various programs that are being conducted. Ms. Burke. Just this one. Yeah, one more to
Good morning, everyone. Thanks again, Chair. Thanks again, Minister and PS, for this opportunity to be able to deliver additional information on what has already been stated by our Minister and Permanent Secretary. It is a mammoth task, according to the Minister, but we have started. If we start from the beginning, we can be able to use the registration process to be able to assist with understanding where do we take our displaced families from to where do we intend to take them over the time. It was critical for us to ascertain who are the displaced persons and where they came from and where they are or were staying. And the registry did just that. We applied a timeline so that persons can register. We worked with different agencies. We worked with the Rotary Club. We worked with other agencies within the diaspora as well that would have worked assiduously in the emergency response within the first few days. We would have also worked with the community disaster emergency response teams. They have been critical in the process, not just just at the point of emergency response, but even now with the distribution process at the level of communities, because without them, we do not know where every person is and how many persons would have returned within their communities. I must say thanks for that. So, in the beginning, we were able to work with the different agencies that were responding on the ground with food and water supplies, etc., within the first few days of the evacuation. From that, we were able to contact all the persons who would have been probably reached by other entities, and now the ministry, in collaboration with as an agency of NEMO, would have been able to contact them to register them within the registration process. However, we would have had some families that would have not been registered or partially registered because of either the rush in the registration process in the earlies or wrong information, as the minister would have stated. However, we cannot leave anyone behind. So even if we could not find them in the initial stages, we have worked with different community groups, community leaders, to be able to at least allocate where they are now, so that at least the basic amenities of food supplies, etc., can be provided to those households. We are currently working with the funding agency Caritas, as the minister would have mentioned, to try to assist those families with additional potential cash support where we could not locate who those families were at that point in time. So with that said, all the other families that would have been registered would have gone through an assessment process. That assessment process looked at a needs assessment tool that primarily looked at the income levels of households once an interview was conducted after the registration began. That interview process would have looked at, and verification would have looked at, the income levels of households that were below $1,000 per month as the average household income. It therefore means it took into consideration all the family members of the household that were working, whether continuously or before the event, so that we can then compare that against the consumption rate of the household or the total number of consumers within the household. And once we develop that formula, we will be able to at least determine how many families will below the $1,000 income level combined. From that, we would have been able to target 3,538 households. As I mentioned earlier, there were families that were not incorporated because we could not locate where they were based on the lack of information that was provided by the households. So we have been able to tap into other sources to be able to reach them at this time. So round 1 payment, as the minister would have indicated, has already been completed. Round 2 started this week already. So we will be continuing with those 3,538 households until the end of September. That is in collaboration with the World Food Program. And the data we have been able to ascertain is not only linked to persons who would have evacuated, but because there are persons who would have also been registered during the period when we were simultaneously assisting households who were not evacuees. It meant that we were able to identify additional assistance, as the minister indicated, where we were helping persons that were not displaced but were at risk because the eruption took place as an external shock. So now we are here. We would have been able to realize that there would have been 399 households that were not targeted out of the pool of families that were registered and verified. We recognized that we needed to provide some sort of support. So the ministry would have targeted the food distribution program, where they were all provided with food packages. However, Caritas Antilles Disaster Relief Fund, or a Social Development Fund, in collaboration with ADRA, which is the Adventist Disaster Relief Fund, as the minister indicated, The ADRA fund would have provided a one-time cash support for 325 households that were above the income threshold. They all received $800 as checks redeemed at the Bank of SVG, and Caritas would have provided for 200 households that are currently on WFP cash-based support, but there are additional vulnerabilities in those families within the red zone. Those families are vulnerable because they have an elderly person and or disabled person within the household, so they would have needed additional cash support during that time. Each family would have received $540 additional for that specific month because it was a one-time cash top-up. They all also received hygiene kits. Caritas would have also provided 300 additional hygiene kits and cleaning kits for families who would have returned in the amount of 414 persons to Chateaubriand and Fitzhugh within the past 2 weeks. In addition to that, so it means that we have allotment, according to the minister, of approximately 8.6 million EC dollars that is to be expended within the period of June to September of this year for families who have been displaced. And that also included the Red Cross, who would have taken care of the balance that did not meet the income threshold of 64 families. So combined, it causes us to realize the 8.6 budget allocation, and 2.6 has already, 8.4, sorry, and 2.6 has already been expended. And by round 2 starting this week, it means that our numbers are about to double with regards to the expenditure, because now we are developing a pattern of using the same beneficiaries for the next couple months. So those families have been targeted as well by UNICEF, where we are looking at households where they are displaced from within the red zone, but we have targeted 500 households with those vulnerabilities, where we are now targeting the households to be able to offer psychosocial support in collaboration with UNICEF starting this month. That basically looks at identifying 4 module contents or 4 units, focusing on coping skills development, looking at the whole traumatic experience. They will also be exposed to parenting education, also exposed to health and hygiene education, and they would also be looking at social inclusion education or things that focus on marginalization of vulnerable populations. So child abuse awareness, domestic violence awareness. We would be looking at disability awareness, because we recognize that in the evacuation process, there would have been elderly or disabled persons that would have been marginalized or left behind, and the ministry would have had to provide the additional support. So we not only want to work with the families where a disability or elderly person exists, but we also want to work with the communities where they came from, because it is critical for us to promote behavior and social change of the mindsets of individuals, so that then going forward we can have more effective communication and empathy towards the situation, because we want more persons to be to understand what is required to work with families where they are marginalized. So with that said, by way of the cash, we would be continuing the exercise going forward. The minister also indicated with regards to food distribution that we are at a minimum expenditure of 6.6 million, and the numbers, when we add all the numbers in terms of the housing, the social development services support, both in cash and in kind and from donor agencies, primarily the ministry would have been responsible for coordinating $28.7 million that will be expended between the period of May to December, basically, in terms of assisting, where it is not by funding agencies, it is therefore by the supplementary budget that was approved by Parliament. And we also are addressing existing circumstances, as the Minister indicated, within the ministry. At this time, as at July 31st, our Social Protection Division, where most of our public assistance cash transfer program is offered, targeted 2,113 households thus far that are outside of the northeast and northwestern region of the country. It therefore means that these families were in the majority. We had 389 households that were targeted for the family support grant, and the excess would have been for emergencies. It meant that emergencies were focusing on the death of a loved one, replenishing of back to school supplies for those who had to return to the learning hubs. We also had to look at medical expenses in terms of pharmaceutical supplies that has to be purchased outside of the hospital. These are some of the areas that we had to focus on. We had to look at registration payments for persons who are returning to the learning hub so that they can sit their examinations, etc. These are some of the areas that we are focusing on simultaneously that we normally expend from a budget allotment of 17.4 million thereabout, which would have been increased due to the supplementary budget. And the minister also indicated that we would be targeting an income support program from the supplementary budget, and the aim should be focused primarily on individuals where they would have been self-employed or other forms of employment that are not farming and they are not in full-time work in a public or private sector entity. So with that said, the registration process has already been in motion, and now it means that we will have to have an eligibility criteria going forward after the preliminary registration process so that we can be able to filter and screen the total number of persons, and it's to a tune of approximately $2.2 million. So with all of this said, what it is saying in summary is that whether in cash, in kind, or through psychosocial support, the ministry has sought to provide additional services, because last year and the year before, if we compare the interventions for the past 3 fiscal years for the same reporting periods, we have been up. Last year we were provided by the Parliament and a supplementary budget to cover for the COVID impact. And the ministry would have gained an additional, I think, $900,000 thereabout to be able to supplement on the social development side. We were not with the Ministry of Housing at that time. So the additional cash that was provided, we were able to reach 702 additional families. But even if those families were met, we would have had an increase of 5.7% in terms of the traffic of persons that are coming into the ministry and receiving access to services. In the instance of the comparison of this year, that we have actually broken even with regards to the efforts of last year by not including our back to school grant as yet officially, because the official period for the reopening of school has not happened as yet, and the inclusion of the data last year would have also included, by this time last year, they would have already had the back to school grant being ruled out, where we would have targeted a minimum of 5,000 students. So if that was included in here, we would have had a drastic increase in the numbers, and simultaneously we did not target persons from within the northeast or west of the country in our local public assistance program, because they are already targeted for cash through our other funding programs through the Last of Ray grant, relief grant. So this is just to say that our numbers are much higher at this time with the efforts, but not only are we offering the cash support or income support, we are simultaneously working on the social psyche of the individuals. And later on in this month, in collaboration with UNICEF, we will be adding an additional 500 families on cash in our public assistance program for our family support grant, where they will be on conditional cash, offered the cash, but being in capacity building sessions, looking at how do they cope, how do they deal with money management, how do they deal with some of the crises that are happening at the level of the home. Because having a low income is one, but then addressing some of the additional social challenges that are coming with low financing makes it more difficult for a family to be able to manage the home. So the ministry is working assiduously. We are not giving up on our people, and the cash and in-kind efforts are ongoing as we continue to work hard to rebuild this nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burke. And ladies and gentlemen, that would bring us to an end of the proceedings. However, granted that the media is here with us this morning, I believe that there may be questions that they have pertaining to what was presented, and I wish at this point in time to make that time available for you to ask any questions, seek clarification on any of the matter that was presented here this morning, either by the Honorable Minister, the Permanent Secretary, or Mrs. Burke, so that you can leave with the necessary information in its most correct form, as the old adage say, from the horse's mouth. So I now open the floor. I would just ask that you indicate which news agency you're from and proceed to ask your question.
Yeah, my name is Morgan, and this is Radio. I was impressed with the place for presentation. And the minister came in after and mentioned saying, in the shelters, you have the personal development in the shelters. Because recently, as of yesterday, I went out there distributing food to people and so on. You have the personal development to happen in the shelters, like people getting out food and so on, or people individually going to give food.
Currently, the Ministry of National Mobilization do not distribute food to persons in the shelters. We are mainly responsible for persons in the private home. The Ministry of NEMO, through the Ministry of Education, who is the shelter manager, is responsible for distribution of food supplies to persons in the shelter.
So you're not happy with individual people going out to distribute food and so on?
No, our persons go into the communities. As I said, we are responsible for persons living in the private homes who are evacuated and staying with persons in the private homes, not the shelters.
So what you are saying that what package to distribute? Should I bring it to you or to the ministry? To distribute?
Oh, NEMO.
NEMO.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Morgan.
Yes, my name is William and I'm from the Green Section newspaper. I mentioned the need of massive rebuilding process. No matter 2 weeks time, so 3 weeks time. Where will these houses be located and the contractors being again, all these houses building is going to start?
Well, as indicated, the repairs, which would address level 0 to level 2, those would be the first things that we would tackle, as I mentioned before, in order to free up the shelters for school reopening that is proposed in October. Sorry. The reconstruction, in terms of massive reconstruction of homes, we are still in the process with physical planning identifying some of the areas that are deemed not suitable for habitation. Because as you are aware, we are still plagued with lahars whenever it rains. So the massive reconstruction, because there would be homes that would have to be removed because they are lying in the floodplains or where the lahars would come down. So as I said, the assessment is an ongoing one. But however, there are things that we can do from the Ministry of Housing in the interim, which is geared towards the repairs from level 0 to level 2. So level 0 to level 2, which can help in lightening up, as we say in layman term, the shelters from the number that we have there once the all clear is given. But the reconstruction process would be a massive venture. And as you know, one of the booming industry in the country right now is the construction industry. So it would take a lot of strategic planning to get the right contractors to make sure. But the thing is, when we start the rebuilding process, it must be an ongoing thing. We do not want to start the rebuilding process and stop here and restart. It must be an ongoing thing. So the repairs would essentially kick off the rebuilding process, and then we would follow that up with the actual reconstruction of homes, because it's still a work in progress. It's a collaborative effort with the physical planning, housing, Ministry of Transport and Works. So it has to be, when we come to a consensus that yes, we are satisfied that this area should not be inhabited, then we start the reconstruction process. So far, lands have been identified in Orange Hill. I think about 41 lots or so has been identified thus far in Orange Hill for the rebuilding process.
If I may add something to that, why we are concentrating only on the repairs, 0 to 2 is the code 0 to 2 is repairs, 3 to 4 is full reconstruction or relocation. So hence the reason why we are currently concentrating on just 0 to 2, level 0 to 2.
Well, while I might say, mention is made of the situation of duplication. How extensive was that, and has it been clarified?
I would leave Marissa work integrally with the stats, so she would be able to provide the answer.
The duplication in the early stages would have occurred when persons would have registered either through different points, because we would have, in order to reach people quickly, because remember in the first few days there were limitations with water, limitations with food supplies, and we didn't know where people were placed. So some registered at shelters, while some registered at the data center at NEMO, some registered through different ministry portals. So by the time we aggregated the information, we recognized that even if we reached people directly in their different areas, when we aggregated the information, we recognized that some people would have applied more than once. So when we did the data cleaning and so on, we would have had to remove those duplicates from within the system.
You're satisfied now that the situation is...
Correct. We are satisfied that we would have done a lot of work. We had actually worked in collaboration. We have what you call a data working group, and that is a collaborative entity with the Ministry of Economic Planning with responsibility for statistics, and also the Ministry of Economic Planning again, but with responsibility for Information Services Division, which is ITSD. So we had a tripartite partnership to ensure the duplication is reduced, and we would have partnered as well with WFP once we started the verification process to ensure that we have cleaned records going forward.
Who were the people in this partnership?
Who were the
tripartite partnership that you mentioned?
our ministry, ITSD, which is Information Technology Services Division, and the Central Statistical Office.
No, okay. Why you there, right?
Before you, Ashisha has
Good morning to everyone. I'm Ashisha from the API. I want to commend the ministry on the work done so far. I know that it isn't easy and you've been doing a great job thus far. I want to talk about the non-farmers income support. One of the requirements the minister mentioned was that you have to be verified by an employer. Now, I'm in the red zone, and I know that there are some people who operate little businesses and would hire, say, 2 or 3 people. What if the person is the employer? What if the person has a business and they hire 2 or 3 people? How would they be verified, or would they even qualify for such a
So in typical social work practices, there is something what you call community assessments. So where, like for instance, if a person is living alone, you can verify through the different community-based organization or community leaders. In the case where someone is self-employed and the owner, we would also be able to use a community assessment. So in previous disasters that had hit Sandy Bay in particular, 2016, November 28, I recall we had a lot of small business owners that had encountered, so I'm using that as an illustrative reference. We had to use, some persons did not even know how much income and so on they were bringing in because they were doing coconut vending, etc. We actually used persons that would frequent the location where the sales are recorded so that we can use representation or information from those persons, because if they are customers, then that is proof as well that the person would have had the business there. We were also able to get from the ministry with responsible for labor department to get like the minimum wages of those particular vendors so that we can be able to ascertain their income levels and work with them. So a similar methodology will be used for this particular experience.
Also, if I may say, the form also has that information that can be captured, whether it's who the business is owned by, who are the employees, and also that has to be certified by a justice of the peace or a notary public. The form has all that information on it, so that data will be captured.
Morgan, you wanted to raise something?
I was about to ask a question, right? The minister mentioned you're going to spend $6.6 million, right? To the school.
6.5 was the purchasing of materials,
Supplementary estimates.
and the 5 million was for the actual reconstruction.
Okay. And then is there help or not? UNICEF?
This is in regards to the housing?
Yeah.
No.
Supplementary.
This came directly from the approval of Parliament through the supplementary budget.
I'm going to spread it out in all communities in this area.
In terms, no, but this is geared towards the volcano reconstruction and relief. So this money, the 11.5 million, is geared towards that.
Red and orange zone.
All right. Any further question to be posed?
You mentioned that in all clear from let's go to move back in the how sooner does we
Well, it is a collaborative effort. The Ministry of Transport and Works through BRAXA, they are responsible for the cleaning of the areas that was laden with ash heavily. Also, we have to work in tandem with the utilities companies such as CWSA and VINLEC in order to ensure that we return the electricity and water to those areas, because it doesn't make sense to give them an all clear and some of the basic essential, because water food, shelter, and those are things that have been severely affected. Water, food, shelter, clothing to some extent, but once we have most of these down packed, with the utilities and so on, I'm sure that the all clear would be given. But that is a double-edged sword because some of the homes too are not deemed livable. They are not livable. So we still have to work out some of these areas as to those folks who would need a complete reconstruction and provide alternative housing for them in the interim while we rebuild.
Some people mentioning about in some of the areas where some people actually return, then some of the facilities provided on like a social level, like say clinics and so on, not really fully coordinated. How do you respond to that? Like in Coast, for example, they were talking about the center of people in Coast and the clinic closed down. What's the your response to that?
Well, that is a question that should really be geared towards the Ministry of Health, because I cannot speak for them as to regards with the health and the infrastructure. So, but I
you mentioned coordinated with the different ministries.
Right.
And so on.
Well, that is true. But like you said, I don't think because I think the Chateaubelair Smart Hospital is up and running.
It's up and running.
So there are facilities nearby that is accessible. As a matter of fact, the Coast Hill Clinic and a few clinics in the North Leeward area, they're up for repairs, and that may be one of the reasons why that facility is not open. I think about 3 of them in the North Leeward area. They're up for some major repairs.
All right, so let me thank you very much, media, for being here with us this morning. This morning press conference was under the auspices of the Honorable Dr. Andrew Brewster, Minister within the Ministry of National Mobilization, Social Development, the Family, Gender, Persons with Disabilities, Youth, Community Development, Cooperative Division, Housing and Informal Human Settlement. A very large ministry with important work to be done. Again, I want to say thanks for those persons who are viewing online. We appreciate your comments. I just want to share a few of them. One person said, in addition to the presentation from the Minister and the Permanent Secretary, Ms. Burke, your presentation was good. I'm impressed with the work being done by the Ministry of National Mobilization. So we want to thank persons who are commenting. Also, that one person said they realize it's a lot of money and they're asking the Minister to be wise in his spending as he proceeds.
Duly noted.
Any critical responses, any comments? Any?
No, those are just in the chat that is on the stream from the Hill News Network. We also want to thank the Hill News Network for streaming live for us on their radio platform and on Facebook. I-95 Radio in Trinidad and Tobago, we want to thank you also for being a part of our program this morning. Kankadi Radio in Canada and Fun City Radio in New York City. We appreciate the fact that you want to share the information. And again, on behalf of the Ministry of National Mobilization, we want to thank those in the diaspora who have contributed tremendously to all that has happened thus far. It was a tedious task here getting the stuff together to distribute, but we appreciate the fact that you took the time out to make your contribution from afar to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and for this we are going to be grateful to you for your invaluable support to the relief effort, and we look forward to your continued support as the Ministry of National Mobilization continues to reach out to the persons who have been affected by the eruptions and those who are vulnerable within our society, as we strive as a ministry to reach each and every single person as much as we can. So once again, thank you media for being here this morning. Until next time, God bless.
Apart from the speech, and yes, you are spoken. Thank you.